Okay, our speaker today was Head of Membership and Promotion at the British Humanist Association before spending the best part of a year working for the Uganda Humanist Association. Currently he's Communications Officer for the International Humanist and Ethical Union, based in London. So in view of the different posts that he's held, he has a unique perspective on organised humanism around the world. I'm delighted he's here to talk to us today, so will you please give a very warm welcome to Bob Churchill.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out and agreeing to listen to a talk about something that's largely quite depressing as well. It's your Christmas talk. Yeah, I work at IHEU now, the International Humanists and Atheists Union.
Let's sort this out.
As you know, that's the international body that the British Humanist Association is a member of. I'll talk about that more shortly. So today I'm going to introduce the IHEU, talk about what we do, the organisation and a bit about humanism, and then we'll look at Witchcraft, which I was about to speak about today. We'll zoom in on sort of how that's been achieved in various different countries, and then we'll look a little bit briefly about what we're doing elsewhere. Can I ask first of all, who's obviously most of you have been to these meetings before, and so then you obviously most people knew that Andrew was, so there's sort of BHA links and so on. But can I ask, can you put your hand up if you've heard of the International Humanists and Ethical Union previously? Okay, and keep your hand up if you can name something that the IHEU does in practical terms. 2, 3, awesome. Okay, that's why I'm the communications officer. Yes? How's that? Line of sight. Okay. It's good to be glad you're coming up January. I'll be able to sort of fill in the gaps I haven't done. He's still when I worked at the BHA, he was the chief executive of the BHA then as well. So he was my boss then. But he's also vice president of the International Humanists and Ethical Union with lead on communications. So I'm still reporting to him. So feel free to tell him the speech was as good as you like when next week. Okay, so the International Humanists and Ethical Union is the global federation of humanists, atheists, rationalists, secularists, skeptic, lay, ethical, cultural, and free thought groups. I think you can really tell when a tagline has been written by a committee, an international committee. It has to have a foreign word in there, like secularism in France. That's the planet Earth. Some of you will recognise that. There we have Amsterdam. That's where we were founded in 1952. We're registered currently in New York. We're headquartered in London. And we have some staff both in London and in India. There's an executive committee who are sort of drawn up from the member organisations around the world who sort of run the organisation. We've got representatives in various different places and a director in India as well, an international director. And there are various other committees, Growth and Development Committee, Grants Committee, that are deciding sort of where funding should go and organising conferences and so on. We're represented at the United Nations in various different places, and I'll come back to that later. IHEU is our youth section, the International Humanist and Ethical Youth Organisation. And rather importantly, there are 130 member organisations in about 40 different countries around the world. So there's a few gaps, little gaps. I haven't plotted all the member organisations on there, but we're not very well represented at the moment in South America or in Middle East and North Africa or the Far East. It's something we're trying to change. The Philippines we're working with at the moment, and we just sponsored last year the first ever Humanist and Secularist conference in Brazil. So there's some good changes in the movement going on. I won't dwell too long on this, as you're humanists already, or you know something about it. This is how the International Humanists and Ethical Union defines humanism, a democratic and ethical life stance that affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility of meaning and shape their own lives. It stands for the building of a humane society through an ethics based on human and other social natural values in a spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. It's not theistic, does not accept supernatural views of reality. So I won't go on that. I think maybe it's worth saying that often, I think the only real sort of cultural way that humanism is slightly differently represented sometimes is whether or not you put something like democracy in there. I think often we have quite a sort of individual conception. Your humanism is like how you relate to the world, not necessarily about how society relates to itself. So it just, most humanists are going to agree democracy is a good idea. It's not always in there as a definition of humanism, but it's particularly important for the International Humanist and Ethical Union, which is big, democratic, and it's something that's lacking in a lot of countries where we work. Okay, I kept this slide in. This was for a presentation for children, but I really like it. So this is moral responsibility, which can come from God or from some sort of historicist ideological tale. That's Marx in the middle, or from some other philosophy. And that's sort of traditionally how people think of moral responsibility. It's sort of handed down to you from something, or it derives from some higher principle. But under humanism, we can think that we have responsibility for each other. That's where it comes from, our moral responsibility. Okay, so we'll talk about witchcraft. So this is not an easy topic. Some of the information that we'll discuss is upsetting. I'm going to focus on a few different countries, and I'm not going to talk too much about the sort of anthropological aspects of it, but focus a bit on the kind of practicalities and how humanists are looking at the topic. So it takes various forms, witchcraft-related abuse and violence. The biggest, most obvious thing is accusations of witchcraft or sorcery, or being a witch, or being a witch child. When this is done, it's often targeting people who are vulnerable. In a lot of places where this is happening, India, Papua New Guinea, Sub-Saharan Africa, women are often the targets, elderly women. And it's for two very distinct reasons. Sometimes it is just that the person is easy to scapegoat, is vulnerable, and just as used to happen in Europe in the Dark Ages and so on, it is a case of trying to blame misfortune on agency and finding that person is easy to blame. A lot of the time it's for property, a lot of the time it's for money. You see this especially in like Nepal and India, that it's that you'll have like a sort of family matriarch, and maybe everyone else has died or moved on, and it's someone who's there in the village sort of taking up a house and has wealth attached to them. And other people in the village then thinking, well, if they weren't there, that would be ours. And actually, sometimes it's not even other people, it's their own family, it's the younger generations of that family who there might be a death in the family, a grandchild dies or something, and so then the elderly relative gets blamed instead. And often children are the target. So again, this varies a little bit how likely the proportion is. Certainly more so in Sub-Saharan Africa, we see this claim that children are witches. Helena Pavio, who I'll talk more about in a bit, she wrote a book about what the symptoms of witchcraft and witch possession are in children. And one of the things that she cited was the tendency to misbehave or wake up and cry in the night. So you can see that it's incredibly broad and can basically be used to target any child at all. But then moreover, additionally, some of the types of children can be singled out: disabled children, children with some sort of illegitimacy, I put that in quote marks, or the stepchildren where maybe a stepfather doesn't want them around and so on. It's sort of easier to blame those children. Agrammatic or albino children, hugely targeted. And twins as well. Twins are sort of seen already as a sort of a bad thing, there's something weird and mysterious about them, so they become very easy for witchcraft accusations to attach to them. But it doesn't just restrict to those groups, anyone can be targeted, and that should be sort of very clear. It doesn't have to be any specific thing or cultural position that they're in. Right. So when I first put this talk together, I looked at a few headlines from the 2 weeks previous to the talk where I first talked about witchcraft. So this was back last summer, around August, July, I think. These are just some headlines from a 14-day period prior to that first talk, and you could do the same thing now or at any time and pick out headlines from around the world that often are overlooked, but are there when you search for them. So this one, tribal woman branded witch beaten up in Rajasthan, branded witch woman flees home, India. Another India, couple branded witches forced to eat excreta and drink urine. So you can see it's very, very abusive the way that people are targeted. Nepal to crack down on witchcraft accusations. Englishman accused of African massacre. This was the guy you might remember from last year. He was accused. He was in I think Central African Republic, and he was accused of he was accused of slaughtering a whole bunch of people in ritualistic circumstances. It was very clearly not him, and Joseph Kony, the Lord's Resistance Army, had just come through the area, and so they had this sort of pattern of slaughtering villages, and then this one Englishman happened to be near one of those villages and sort of got singled out and blamed, so he had to be sort of rescued by diplomatic effort. Alleged witch's husband vows to stand by her. That's in Africa. Zimbabwe. Bihar woman lynched for practicing witchcraft. So those are just a sample of headlines from a 2-week period, and as I say, you can do the same at any point. Witchcraft per se isn't the only issue. There are various other issues sort of linked to it and around it. So we have laws that target witchcraft and witches. So it's not just about accusations that get made, it's about countries with laws that specifically make it illegal to be a witch or to practice sorcery, which obviously then mean that witchcraft allegations can be pursued in law, but it also increases the sort of background level of social persecution. Ritualistic murder and often of children. So again, this often is used to target like poor and vulnerable families. In Uganda, it's been used to target families who they maybe live sort of out on the city limits of Kampala, don't have any money, in a country where you cannot call the police and expect them to do anything unless you can bribe them. So even if you've got something as important as my child has gone missing and also body parts have been found nearby in a ritualistic killing, you can't get police attention because you can't afford to pay the police to take any notice. And there's just a sort of wider social apathy about what's happened to those children anyway. Sometimes they're being targeted and killed just wholesale. It's the sacrifice of the child is what mattered. Very often it's body parts or blood that is being sort of taken. So you do get sometimes children sort of amputated, but it usually results in their death, even if they're only trying to take a body part or blood to use in a ceremony. And then we have witch doctors and traditional healers who, in various different ways, are taking money or goods or property in return for services. We'll talk more about that, but it can result in ritualistic murder. It can mean magic is being done as a service in return for money, and so that you get things like wealth or success or revenge, win over a lover. And magic for healing, which obviously, if what you think is being healed is a terminal illness or a communicable illness, then the fact that you think it's being healed doesn't just affect you, it means that it can affect wider society. Okay, so we're going to sort of zoom in on Africa a bit. There's Africa. I just put that up. It's a famous image of the site, so you might not be able to read all of the country names there. The big brown blob in the top left is the United States. Big red blob is China, and we have Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Eastern Europe, India, more of China, the UK, Japan, all of these countries that would fit the land surface-wise inside of Africa. So it's just sort of showing that when we're talking about Africa, we are talking about a very big place, and you can't expect the exact same situations to occur in one place and another. On the other hand, there is some cultural homogeneity. This map is showing sort of spread of dominant religions. The big green area is region dominated by Islam. The big purple area is Christianity. And so you can see that actually there are whole areas where, using this as a proxy for other sort of forms of sort of cultural difference, we can see that because lots of Africa was in sort of a similar social and economic state of colonialism, it is the case that many of the individual issues are quite similar in different sub-Saharan African countries. It's just worth pointing out as well, traditional religions is grey there. No single country in Africa on this map is greyed out entirely. Some of the countries, Madagascar there, for example, is sort of crosshatched to show that it's a bit of a mixture. It's sort of 50-50. But it's not the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. I point that out because I hear people a lot, the first question I get is, I hear that traditional religions are sort of mixed side by side with Christianity. And it's kind of true, but not in a very dominant way. Christianity, for a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, is very much taken over, and individual practices of traditional beliefs might be around, but not in a kind of systematic way. Okay, so we're going to focus in on Nigeria. This woman is Helen Pavio, who runs a ministry. She has been in trouble with the police, but then sort of bounced back again recently. These posters are of her huge deliverance services. As you can see, witchcraft and the eradication of witchcraft in the first one there as a major part of these services. She's one of the wealthiest women in the country. She runs one of the largest church networks in the country. This is her most recent poster from last month, showing witches on the run, offering free deliverance, although in fact there are lots and lots of ways that money gets eked out of the congregation throughout the event. It's not really free at all, of course. In particular, she preaches at her, often ill-educated congregation that witchcraft is real. The deliverance rallies are a money spinner, as I said. Exorcism and abuse is part and parcel of this. So on the sort of roadshow, exorcising, identifying individual children as witches, exorcising them, which is itself rather abusive, is part and parcel of that. But as a result, children are made homeless. It's not the case that she just identifies individual children, exorcises them, takes the money and leaves. It's that in many cases those individual children are now sort of untouchable and are forced to leave. Their family don't want them anymore. Nollywood films. She runs a huge sort of film industry, but there are some famous films that she put out, but they're actually sort of leaked out all the time. And one that I saw whilst I was in Uganda, I didn't go out of my way to find it, it was just there on network television in the middle of the day, told a story about a village that suffered some misfortune and blamed someone for witchcraft. And as I was watching it, I thought, okay, this is good, I can see where this is going. It's going to turn out that they shouldn't really have blamed the woman for witchcraft. Actually, it was something else that caused the misfortune. But as it went on, it just became clear that no, the woman being accused of witchcraft was a literal witch in this fictional story. And at the end, they kill her, and she's in a terrible special effect. She kind of raises up into the air and bursts and disappears. So it's trying to show that the magic is real, and it has the opposite moral story from the one that we might want to tell. And it's utterly pervasive, and the Nollywood films, I mean, there's a celebrated industry, and it's seen as certainly in Nigeria, it's seen as part of its sort of cultural success. But even aside from the witch stuff, a lot of the stories are moral tales about how if women step outside of their boundaries, then, oh look, now her parents have died because of some chain of events, some dramatic chain of events will lead to a woman stepping outside of her boundaries to the whole family suffering great misfortune. And it's sort of just drilled in over and over again. She was featured in Africa's Witch Children, which was a Channel 4 documentary which some of you may have heard of before. And that was a few years ago now. And as I said, it did have an impact on her and her ministry, but she is now back. This poster is just from last month. So it had a lasting impact on other practitioners of witchcraft accusation in the country, but it didn't get rid of her. There's some children who have been accused of being witches, and one of the upshots of this, not just in Nigeria, but in Ghana, Malawi, and Zambia, are witch camps, which are sort of villages full of, you get homes, shelters for children, which camps for old women, and the people that no longer can go home, that they've had their property seized from them or their family have abandoned them, that's where they go. So the Humanists in Nigeria, in particular, Leo Igwe, have been working for some years with Stepping Stones Nigeria, which is a UK charity, and they were involved in the making of the Witchcraft film, and they're involved as well in supporting the shelters out there, but moreover trying to sort of prevent more of this from happening by improving education. We'll come back to that slightly. Just to sort of show the level of resistance that humanism and that Leo, who runs the Nigerian Humanist movement, had in Uganda. This is a webpage from Helena Pavio's blog. Leo Igwe the Monster is the caption under his name there, looking very monstrous obviously. And the text reads, "The atheist fraudster called Leo Igwe and his partner in crime, Stepping Stones Nigeria, have come up with blackmail against Helena Pavio for pecuniary reasons. The question is, why is Leo Igwe and Stepping Stones Nigeria so perplexed about Helena Pavio's ministry? The fact is that Leo Igwe and his atheist groups are making huge sums of money through these blackmails. Obviously, I can tell you very certainly that the Nigerian Humanists have not made huge sums of money, and that no humanist group is making money out of accusing Helena Pavio of using children of witchcraft, and it's very much the case that she is onto a huge mini-spun that has made her one of the richest women in the country, and so of course, guilty of that, she accuses Leo and others of doing exactly that. People who do not believe in the existence of God cannot explain the ways of God, it says. And this is another example, not related to witchcraft. This is a letter in All Africa, which is a syndicated news media. And this is someone writing a letter to them saying, so this is objecting to the registration of the Nigerian Humanist movement. For many years they were just unable to register as a formal organisation in Nigeria. And someone writing to the paper, to such a human rights group, all shades of sex mannerisms, especially homosexuality, must be allowed in Nigeria, not minding local feelings and sentiments about them. Thus, Leo wants to register a humanist movement to propagate that evil in Nigeria, of homosexuality and avoidance of it. Which one spoils the society? Of course it is homosexuality. Its advocates are the true enemies of humanity or humanism. This would be a very common opinion. This is why it's so hard, why there's so much cultural resistance to both the anti-witchcraft stuff and homosexuality and the other human rights issues that they comment on. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about Malawi now. That's where Malawi is in relation to Nigeria's there. So Malawi actually has a law inherited from the British. Yeah, there's a question?
When the writing is very small, we can't read it.
Okay. I'm trying. I think I sort of
reading it very quickly, and we can't hear it. So.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I talked through if there's a bullet point, I talk about it. I might not read the actual bullet point itself, but I'm talking through them, and I'll try and do that. So this is 1911 Witchcraft Act, outlaws witchcraft accusations. This is the law inherited from British colonial times, which says it is illegal to accuse someone of being a witch. But the reality is that it's largely ignored. This is a quote from a lawyer, a Malawian lawyer, saying, witchcraft has always lived with us. Here it's older than Christianity or Islam, it's part of our Malawian tradition. And I picked that out just because that's the very general sort of first line of defence, saying that witchcraft accusations should be illegal. So George Thindwa, who is the head of the Malawian Association for Secular Humanism, ASH, his general line is, well, the beliefs of the police and the courts are becoming the law. Actually, there's a law against this. So whatever you think is the police or a court is irrelevant. There is a law against it. The police are keeping people who have been accused of being witches when it is actually the accusers that need to be taken to task. And this is a line that he's been going over and over for many, many years. But it is having some positive effect. He gets a lot of media attention in Malawi, and he's had a lot of successes. There are women freed from prison because George and the Humanists were doing this advocacy work and supporting their legal cases that otherwise would still be in prison or worse as witches today. This particular news story as well is talking about his prize. You might have heard of the James Randi sort of challenge, which is that he'll give lots of money to someone who can prove psychic abilities. George does something similar, which is that he'll give lots of money to someone who can curse him with witchcraft. Which is silly, but it's also quite a media-friendly thing. It means that when he's cited in the press every time, it's the guy that hasn't been cursed yet, even though he will give lots of money to anyone who can kill him with witchcraft. So he won a prize from the Nordic Rainbow Humanist Trust, which was made to him on the basis that this has been made for their courageous public stand for LGBT identity and rights in this African nation, taking great risks in retaliation from homophobic politicians, religious leaders, and a hostile mass media. And certainly, I mean, this is from the Rainbow, so it focused on the LGBT issues, but it emphasises how dangerous the work is and that it does make you a target. And frankly, one of the problems of making this kind of challenge is that someone might try and poison you or kill you in some other way and claim that it was witchcraft that did it. So it's really a very brave thing to be doing. This is from the Nyasa Times. Malawi humanist Ndwa gets Norway aid. Defiant witches do not exist. So this is a news story from just last year, and because he's had some success, raised the media profile, focused on the legal issues, what we've seen recently is a huge grant from the Norwegian embassy in Malawi that has essentially said the work that the Malawian humanist movement is doing is so good that we're going to give you a rather large amount of money, which is, the purpose of which is essentially to pick large areas of the countries and say we want to eradicate witchcraft accusations in these areas. And so there's a huge project where he's systematically working through various different regions, running education projects, and identifying where there are problems of people currently being persecuted as witches to try and kill the problem dead. But obviously, a very difficult task. Okay, so we'll just move on to Uganda and what the humanists are doing there. I can talk about this in slightly more detail just because I was there for a while. That's Uganda on Lake Victoria. It's about the size of the UK, roughly. So I was working with the Uganda Humanists Association. That's not the Uganda Humanists Association, obviously, that's some of the beneficiaries of one of the projects. So I just give a little bit of background because often I find that certainly before I went, I didn't know what Uganda was really like, and so if you talk about the problems without sort of being able to picture the wider sort of social state that things are in, they can seem a little abstract. So this is I took this picture, it's a really sort of typical street scene in Uganda, in Kampala. There are really built-up buildings right in the middle of Kampala. This is somewhere sort of not quite suburby. You can see there's only one high-rise in the background, plus the one that the photo is taken from. There are power cables. You can see the power cables, but not many people have got power. It's many more in Kampala too, but across most of the country, most people are without power. Fairly open kind of sewage and drainage systems. I think the only atypical thing about this is that there is very little traffic on this road at this time. Often Kampala is absolutely rammed with cars and Matatu taxis, but you can see the motorbikes and a few motorbikes, and they're really common. This is a more rural area. These are huts banda huts made with sort of soil and excrement walls that are sort of dried out, very solid, very waterproof, with the straw roofs on. And these villages that literally are clusters of huts. This particular village I went visited. It's right up in the north, right on the border with South Sudan. I went for a funeral, so everyone from some villages and the surrounding villages came to a great big sort of tent that was erected temporarily for the day. And it's worth pointing out that this whole village was newly built. These buildings aren't very old. The old village had been torn down by the Lord's Resistance Army going through pillaging and killing everyone some 15, 20 years previously, so it's all been rebuilt since then. And this is a view in Entebbe, which is more sort of suburban, if you like, but it's still, cement walls, tin roofs, The building I'm in there has a compound wall around it, that's really common. I had a friend ask me, what's your compound like in the UK? I'm like, I don't live in a compound, but there it's the sort of symbol of middle class success if you've got a compound wall and an Ascari guard on the door. Okay, that was some of the projects. That's a wedding that's sort of highly influenced by Indian dresses. You can see people pulling the stops out there for a lovely wedding. Okay, so this was a poster in Kampala, driving through in a taxi that I saw. The light of new hope, the bright future of Africa. Rio Huakawa, who is giving his first lecture in Africa in the Nambuli Stadium. And when I saw this, and I saw the line, Happy Science is the name of this particular organisation, I was like, well, that doesn't sound very good, obviously. Happy Science, it looks very clearly a bit culty. You're paying a large amount of money to go to Nambuli Stadium and listen to this guy who's going to ask you for more money. And I said to the people in the taxi with me, like, oh, that's terrible, isn't it? That this guy coming here, running the stadium and just asking you all for money for some pseudo-religious thing. And the people in the taxi who weren't humanists were like, I don't know, you can't prejudge these things, can you? You have to keep an open mind. And I was like, what sure, be open-minded, but you're Christians, right? You can't this guy claims to be the new Messiah. He's the next descendant after Buddha and Krishna and Jesus and Muhammad and all the rest. Like, very obviously there's something wrong with this guy asking for some money. And I tell this because this problem is identified by the Ugandan humanists as one of the big challenges that they face, which is the sort of general background level of critical thought that isn't happening. So they raise that time and time again as underlying all the other work, which is that people are too keen and too eager to believe, just as a sort of facet of the culture as it stands, in claims to divine and religious and superstitious entities. It's a problem that can kind of be traced to the school. They inherited that sort of rote learning system and haven't sort of moved it on in any way, and that's often cited as a sort of cause of this by the humanists globally. I saw lessons on IT that didn't involve any computers, that it's just a government mandate that you have to have lessons in IT. And I was like, well, that's like doing your sports classes by kind of drawing goals on the board and footballs and stuff. It's just useless. You're not learning how to fit. But sort of rote learning and the lack of resources, and to some extent the lack of having developed sort of good teacher training is part of that problem. Child sacrifice. I picked out child sacrifice in Uganda. Obviously, it doesn't affect the average person. It's not something that you stumble across every day. But two things. One, it is happening, and it's happening in large numbers. And two, it's growing. It's a worse problem now than it was, say, 10 years ago. This is a BBC News Africa report from 2011 in response to a report that came out. This child, they were trying to cut his head off, but he moved and sort of took the machete on the skull there. You probably can't see it, sort of cut across his skull, and the picture on the right, and I think a burn there on the arm. So he's someone who was lucky in that he escaped. This report that was out in 2011, the Jubilee Campaign report, again, a British charity, so there's lots of little ties still there, looks at the issue of the sacrificial murder of children, or the dismemberment of children. And it compared these official police figures, which found one case of child sacrifice in 2006, in 2008, 25 alleged ritual murders, and in 2009, another 29. And it found very many people who vehemently contested this, including this guy who was a pastor in Kampala, I think, who said that there were more victims from his parish in a year than the official statistics for the entire country. And the Jubilee campaign found sufficient evidence to claim that the true number of cases is hundreds, more than 900 cases, that have yet to even be investigated. So this is cases that were raised at some point, but the police didn't have the, well, supposedly didn't have the resources to deal with them. Again, there's a huge connection with money here. The elites, the powerful, use it they're using magic, or what they think they're using these magical services, paying for people to be bloodless and killed and so on, to sort of stabilise and ensure their prosperity. Businessmen are using it to sort of magically attack their competitors as opposed to bring their business success. But the poor use it as well, and they establish a sort of trap where, just like in lots of other sort of sales techniques, you're sort of bought in initially with some small thing, like if you just give me this, then this small, like this bit of silk, or this small fee, then I'll do some magic for you. When it doesn't work, it escalates slightly. We need to do the ceremony again to cement it. But of course, there's another technique, which is that sometimes you ask for something, just like with prayer, and sometimes you get it, right? So there's a sort of confirmation bias where sometimes something good happens and you think therefore it must be the magic that caused it. So people get kind of suckered in and pulled in that way, and it's a bit like gambling addiction. And ultimately, this can sort of be escalated until someone is prepared to pay what they call big blood, which is when you escalate maybe through animal sacrifice to human sacrifice. The report recommended new laws were needed that specifically target this, a new government department dedicated to this, a new court dedicated to this. It recommended legislation separating traditional healing from witchcraft, which is actually problematic. I think there are some traditional healers who essentially are just witch doctors doing exactly the same thing. It's not, you cannot easily pull these two things apart. Which I'm not saying that all traditional healers do this. I'm just saying that there's too much overlap to just say they're different things, and the awareness needs to be increased in general. This is a sort of image from one of the projects in Uganda. This is showing someone giving money to a witch doctor, and the caption from the witch doctor says, "Thanks, now I will do magic for you." So he's been given money and he's performing these services that we've talked about for wealth, for love, for prosperity, revenge, and so on. And I asked a leading pastor in Uganda, what was the bigger issue? What was the worst concern? Is it witch doctors who take money for magical services, or is it pastors who take money and other favours for divine purposes? And he said, oh, it's definitely us. It's definitely the pastors that are worse. Not him, obviously. But his fellow pastors that were taking money in return for prayers that were supposed to bring healing, taking money in return for the communal love and the effect of the church that would cure your HIV, for example. And I think one of the reasons it's worse with the pastors, partly it's because it's more widespread, but secondly it's because they're more likely to go to the pastors for divine healing. Like you go to the witch doctor for earthly things, wealth, prosperity, and so on. You go to the church if you want healing. So it's there that they're not just taking money from people uselessly, but saying that they've cured HIV. So the HAVREF projects, the Humanist AIDS Victims Rehabilitation Forum in Uganda. This diagram is showing the same guy coming along, and this time he's being told, keep your money, you need to take these medicines and see this doctor. So there's the HAVREF guy and the doctor in the middle, and the witch doctor and the pastor slinking away guiltily in the background. And that's essentially how it works, that they come along and are trying to educate people in the area of Garriga, which is a fishing village area around Lake Victoria, where high levels of illiteracy, lack of education, just preyed on. You have to go up the road quite a long way to get to the nearest clinic where you might get free antiretroviral drugs if they're actually available this week, but it's sort of easier to give a small amount of money to someone nearby who's not actually doing anything but is claiming to magically cure you. That's the sort of team of counsellors there. Very, very briefly, although it's not specific to HAVREF, that HAVREF is just one of the projects associated with the Uganda Humanist Association. There are also the Humanist schools, which you've probably heard about here in the UK, because there's been a lot of support for the Humanist schools from the UK. Halia and Wafwea, which both run projects going into schools. So they don't run the schools, but they run projects going into schools, running workshops and education that way. Kasese United, which is also running a school, but it's more of a kind of social group, more kind of regional humanist group. And IHEU there, which was working with women in Kampala who were doing sex work or at risk of doing sex work, and giving them vocational training and sort of further education to get them away from that. In the north of the country, was working with internally displaced people, again usually women, who were kind of left behind in the IDP camps after the Joseph Kony Lord's Resistance Army movement went through. So there were whole villages burnt down. It took a very long time. Everyone came together in camps, and then the kind of people that got stuck and left behind were maybe women whose maybe their parents were both dead. So all the inheritance went to the brother, and the brother will say, "Well, this is mine. I'm the man. I need this to get by, but you find a husband." That's how it works. So the women get dispossessed in various different ways, of which that's a relatively common one. They get dispossessed of what would have been theirs. In some cases, they were born in the camps and don't know where home is, so there was no home to go to from the IDP camp. And there's a burgeoning CFI Uganda. I should say that Uhezwa is now HELU, Humanist Effort for Livelihood. Uganda has sort of branched off into its own group. So there's the leaders of some of the projects in Uganda. And we'll move on to IHEU at the United Nations. So this was the map I showed you earlier, and we'll take everything off it except where we have some United Nations representation. So we have special consultative status at New York, and Geneva and Vienna. We have general consultative status at UNICEF and the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. We have relations with UNESCO, who accredit us, and observer status at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I'll focus specifically on Geneva, although it's worth pointing out that Matt Cherry, who's our sort of outgoing US representative, who's moving on to become the executive director of the campaign against the death penalty in the United States. But he's been working very hard in New York for a number of years. He's the president of the Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief in New York, so he's the first non-religious person for that role, and he was elected 3 terms in a row. So there's been a lot of effort and work done there on humanist topics under the sort of banner of freedom of religion or belief. So in Geneva, we regularly speak out on witchcraft. It's not the only issue we work on, obviously, at the United Nations Human Rights Council, but it's something that we've sort of stayed with and talked about lots of times. I wanted to pick out a few things from this particular statement from last March. This is Leo from Nigeria. This is something we've been quite good at. It's getting people who are out in the field to be guest speakers, or people who are affected by the issues to be guest speakers on our delegation at the UN. And just to read something from Leo's speech last March, he said to the Human Rights Council, "Belief in witchcraft, often sustained with the collusion of state agencies and religious institutions, is fueling worldwide human rights abuse. In 2010, we submitted a statement to this council urging African states to take action to combat witchcraft-related abuse in the region. But today, these human rights violations continue in many countries. In India, at least 2,500 mainly single or widowed women in poor rural communities have been killed in the past 10 years. Similar killings have been reported in Nepal and Papua New Guinea. In December, a woman was beheaded in Saudi Arabia for practicing witchcraft and sorcery." So again, sometimes it's the law itself, the law of the land, that is the problem. A few months earlier, a Sudanese national was beheaded in the same country for the same imaginary offence. In Ghana and Burkina Faso, makeshift camps exist where many women internally displaced due to witchcraft accusations take refuge, languishing without proper care and support from their governments. Witchcraft-related attacks and killings have been reported from Guinea, Conakry and Mozambique. Torture and murder of those suspected of witchcraft continue in Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania and Uganda. Witchcraft is deemed a crime in many states across Africa. But in Central African Republic, half the prison population comprises those convicted of this imaginary crime. And in many countries where accusations of witchcraft are criminalised, there is a lack of political and judicial will to enforce the law. Belief in witchcraft and spirit possession are also prevalent in Europe, particularly within African communities. He gives the example of Christy Banu and Victoria Clouier in London.
Please, could you speak a bit slower?
Yes. Sorry.
It may be very familiar to you, but it's mainly about...
Oh, sorry about that.
Because nobody can take it in that far.
All right, sorry. And finally, he said that promoting belief in witchcraft has become big business, with pastors, witch doctors and clerics exploiting fear and ignorance for political and financial gain. Mr. President, witchcraft exists only in the minds of those who believe in it. No human being is endowed with supernatural powers. We urge all member and observer states of this council to end the torture, killings and abuse in the name of witchcraft and to educate their people against this pernicious abuse. So obviously you can speak at the United Nations Human Rights Council. It's obviously it's one of those things that is often called a talking shop, and just speaking about it it can lead to change, but it's only one thing in and of itself. We ran a seminar there, side event in March 2012, and we had a huge amount of input to the policy statement in 2009 put out by the United Nations. And this effectively sets, international policy on witchcraft. And in line with the things that I've said, it points out that traditional beliefs, but also very much criticises Christian churches for their role in propagating and catalysing these beliefs in witchcraft. It points out the abuse, including the two kinds of abuse, sort of dismembering and killing people versus persecuting them directly. It criticises by name Helena Pavio, as well as the Bishop of Aya, who he was, after the Channel 4 documentary, he was sent to prison for murder, the things that were uncovered in that documentary. It also mentions the problem with exorcism in some of the witch camps. So for some of these villages that have sort of said, okay, we will allow these women from other villages who've been accused of witchcraft, we'll allow them to come and live here. Before they're allowed to get in, they're exorcised again. So the belief is still there, even in the villages that agree to take these people on. It notes that there's been progress, and that where there has been progress, it has been because of the international attention. It noted the need for education. For education to start young and early in schools against witchcraft in general, and for it to be enforced, as George is doing in Malawi, that if there's a law, it needs to be enforced. I think it's maybe worth mentioning with the education how deep this goes. I had friends who were graduates from the university in Entebbe, and when this subject came up and we were talking about it in Entebbe, I said, well, obviously, presumably none of you believe in the power of human sacrifice, none of you believe in black magic or would give your money to a witch doctor, for example. And they went, no, you're only saying that because you're a Westerner. Obviously there's African magic. I mean, we wouldn't say you should go and give your money and kill someone with the money, but of course there's African magic. And I was close friends with these people, so I was like, what are you talking about? Obviously there's, I mean, what does that mean? If I did the same magical ceremony in Norway or somewhere, would it not work because it's no longer in Africa? And they kind of went, well, I get, yeah, it wouldn't work because the magic comes from the land in some way. And I was like, okay, so what if you were flying over in a plane? Like, what's the limit? What makes it African magic? And why is it? Why do you think it's true? And the reality is that most people have grown up with some story or other that links maybe their family history. I wouldn't be here today if my grandparents hadn't been involved in such and such, if that magic hadn't happened and got rid of that business owner or hadn't brought them together. So it's very hard to kind of chip away at it, and you do need to start young. And we've been working with others. Recently we're going into a partnership with the Witchcraft and Human Rights Information Network. The most recent thing we did with them was put out a statement in response to Obama's tour of Africa in the summer, saying that he needed to address this issue. Unfortunately, he didn't. He decided not to address the issue of witchcraft and homosexuality were the two things that we said he should focus on. There was a small mention of homosexuality, but it was widely reported in the African media. And this is one way of sort of chipping in and trying to kind of change the general background story that's being told. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the witchcraft stuff I want to talk about. I just thought I'd very briefly mention as well, last year for the first time the International Humanists and Atheists Union put out a report on the way that atheists and non-religious people, and humanists in particular, are discriminated against around the world in various ways. It covered 60 countries last year. This year's report, which we just published and made available for free online on Tuesday to mark Human Rights Day, is the second annual report that we hope to keep doing. This one features every country in the world, so it's hugely expanded from the 60 countries last year, and kind of rates the countries. The map that you can see on the front there showing the sort of data. There are beautiful groups like local chapters, local groups, and they then can participate in that sort of wider movement, partly by being sort of represented at the International Humanists and Atheists Union at the General Assembly, for example, and taking part in the democratic processes, the policy formation, and events. And of course, for supporting our projects. One example worth mentioning is North East Humanists. They've been an associate member of IHEU for some time. Obviously, they're already a sort of regional group, I think, and they've put a lot of effort into supporting the Uganda Human Schools project, for example. So there's nice sort of ties that are possible between local humanist groups and the wider international movement. And the very final thing that I wanted to mention is that we have World Humanist Congress next year in 2014 in Oxford. So this is the IHEU Triennial World Humanist Congress. It happens once every 3 years. We're talking about freedom of thought and belief is the theme. So it runs up against lots and lots of other issues that we focus on in our policy agenda. Andrew will probably tell you more about it when he's here in January. He'll be a speaker. Taslima Nasreen is there, Richard Dawkins, Wallace Yinka, and many other speakers. But you can ask Andrew about that probably next month. Thank you very much.